Today's guest is Jodi Bruns. She is a leadership and civic engagement specialist with NDSU Extension, and she happens to work right in my home county of Dickey County here in North Dakota. She is also a board member for Growing Small Towns, so I was delighted for her support and for her volunteerism on our board. We spent some time talking about that as an agent with Extension. She has a lot of community programs that are available. We talk about the range of those, but we also just talk about some of the trends that they're seeing in the communities that they work with, what some simple things are that we can do. And then we spend a bulk of our conversation talking about a remote worker initiative, what that could mean for small towns, what we're doing here locally to at least kick off the idea. And hopefully it inspires you in your community to start something new, to do what you can. And along with that, I want to encourage you to listen and make sure you grab Jodi's Fast Five. She offers 5 quick tips for civic engagement, to increase civic engagement in your community. It's a fantastic set of tips. You want to make sure you grab that at the end of the episode. I will tell you where to get that. So without further ado, here is Jodi Bruns. Well, hey, Jodi, welcome to the Growing Small Town Show.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's nice to be with you today.
I am happy to have you here. So for our listeners, I will have already given, they know who you are from your bio or your intro that I gave, but I am happy to share that you are officially now a board member for Growing Small Towns. And I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful for an expanded partnership, I guess, with NDSU Extension. I think that might be a good place to start. I think there are still a lot of people that don't really get who Extension is, what Extension does, what it means, why it matters. So can we just start there with kind of an overview of what the actual agency is and what you guys do?
Right. So Extension is exactly what it sounds like. NDSU Extension is an extension from the university. Every state has a land grant university, and that's what North Dakota State University is. And I work for the outreach portion of NDSU. And so essentially, we're taking resources from the land grant university and bringing them out to the state of North Dakota. And that's been the original mission of Extension. And that is what we continue to do today around specific program areas. Most people are familiar with 4-H, right, our youth development program, but we also serve in areas of agriculture. That's another, and research, right? That's another area that people are quite familiar with. But another branch of what we do, a program area, is leadership and civic engagement. And that's specifically around the program area that I work in.
What does that look like? What is leadership and civic engagement? I mean, I know there's programs, there's specific things that you do. But right. Let's just say in a perfect world, if a community was fully plugged in to the resources available through Extension for that specific thing, what does that mean and what does that look like?
So many of the things that we do when we work with communities, they're asking for, maybe they're in a situation where people aren't getting involved. Maybe leadership is stagnant. People aren't running for office. And we see that a lot where people, many times positions are running unopposed. Let's say a county commission seat or any position, board member. And so we work with communities. Maybe we'll bring in a program called Lead Local and just get people talking about getting involved in your community. So we do that. Sometimes we just lead conversations. We do quite a bit of facilitation. Oftentimes just getting people to talk about what's going on in their community is a big leap. I know that sounds so simple, but...
it's not. not from where I sit, Jodi, it's not. But when I started chuckling, you're like, maybe people need help getting people involved. And I'm like, that has to be every small town on the planet. It seems to be something that a lot of communities struggle with. So I love that you're a resource for that. I would love to just hear from you kind of as a person who sees and works with a lot of small towns, and you yourself are living in a small community. What do you think are some of the barriers to getting people to get involved? I think it's super common that positions run unopposed. I think that's a really common thing. And so what do you think might be some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so I think about this a lot. I'm kind of a civic engagement nerd, and I really try to think about, why do some communities succeed and why don't some? And I think this is, communities have been working on some kind of community program for decades. I mean, this isn't a new issue. I think sometimes maybe, even it's a generational issue. I mean, I think the generation, maybe the boomers, or even the generation before that, just had an expectation to get involved and continue to make their community a great place to be. And I think some of that mindset has changed. And I don't know if it's just the way we discuss civic engagement, but I don't know that people necessarily have a propensity to get involved unless they're asked to do a specific job. Can you bake bars for the fundraiser? Or can you attend one meeting? Or, I think like a generation ago, I think people served for decades. They got into a leadership position and they just served forever until they retired or, they weren't able to do so. People don't look at leadership like that anymore. I think like my generation, we want task specific. I will help, but I want to know exactly how long and what is required. And I think term limits are a good thing if they're staggered and that boards continue to have some kind of institutional knowledge that remains. But new ideas and new blood is really important for, I would say, the future of any organization or community.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you're talking about things that this is partly why growing small towns now exists. I mean, this is a huge thing from my perspective. So I'm a Generation X, right? I totally think that generations I think they play a huge role in this. But what I think is something that we maybe aren't, and I would love your opinion on this. I think the millennial generation or this upcoming generation, we have an opportunity to really leverage their desire to make an impact. They're a socially conscious generation in the sense that they care about stuff, right?
True.
And so the question then becomes like, how do we get one of the things they care about to be something that can drive community engagement or, community development? And there's things, right? So what have you seen that really works to kind of overcome? Well, and let me preface it this way. Do you think the boomers or the older generations, do you think they have a hard time letting go? And if so, how do we help them? Because what I know doesn't work, Jodi, is just saying like, but we need new stuff and we need to change things. And, yeah, it'd be a great job, guys, but we need to do things different. And they just they literally, the walls go up immediately, as they kind of maybe should, because it's
Right.
a little dismissive to just suggest that everything needs to be changed, right? So have you seen instances where it's been effective, like the torch has been effectively passed and everybody got along and it went well?
Well, that's certainly a utopian society.
Yeah, it sure is.
And there are certainly some organizations and communities that come to mind when I think about those that are run like a well-oiled machine. I mean, for sure, there's organizations and communities that have a level of maybe a lack of trust of the next generation or new people coming on board and thinking about change. And change is hard because, there's always that one resistant to different ideas. And I think we promote that in the work that we do in communities is listening to new ideas. That doesn't mean we always have to get along. It's important to listen and be open to new ideas, but that works on both sides. I mean, I've seen where perhaps you have millennials on a board that, do not want to hear what's worked in the past.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you'll hear boomers say, well, we've tried it and that's never going to work. And that can be so defeating to any organization or a community when people aren't willing to try something again.
Yeah. That's such a good point because we may have tried something 10 years ago, but the community is different now. The players may be different now, right? There's different circumstances and if we tweak just a part of that approach. Yeah. So I totally see that. And I think the thing is so when I said get along, that's probably completely unrealistic, but even just the idea that we could get to a respectful discussion, right? Where I respect that you see the world differently than I do. I get concerned about that because we can't just dismiss out of hand these people that have been around the block as many times as they have. They've seen things, they've lived things, they've experienced things that we haven't. And so I try really hard to bridge that by keeping my mind open. I mean, I think open-mindedness is something that we really need to foster in small towns. Does that feel true to you, having done all this work?
It's so important. And I recently put together a publication on effective board practices. Mm-hmm. And that is so much of the research shows that, as soon as people feel like their opinion is not valued, they're done. They just check out. Well, you don't think I know anything, so I can go somewhere else and spend my time. And, I'm simplifying that, but essentially that's true. We all need to feel like we're valued, and if you have a board member that's not being effective, that's where it's valuable to have term limits on some of those things. And so they can try it. I've served on boards where I've thought, I'm going to give it my best effort, but after a while, I've realized this probably isn't the best fit for me. And you know what? That's okay. Then go find something that you do care about.
Right.
And I think maybe some of the disconnect and why people don't get involved is because maybe they just haven't found the right fit. People get involved with activities that their children are involved in or that they care deeply about. And we're most effective when we do that.
Yeah.
And so if people aren't feeling comfortable or feeling really engaged, maybe it's just okay to take a look and decide, maybe this isn't the best fit for me.
Right. So Dakota Resources is this group that I love working with them as one of their guidelines. So they have this session at the Rural X specifically, where they've got guidelines for how to get the most out of the sessions. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's kind of what you just said. It literally says contribute where you can. And if you feel at any point like you're not learning or you're not contributing, feel free to leave the session and find one where you can. It's like, it should just be given that permission explicitly like that. Like if you're sitting in a session and you don't feel like you're getting anything from it and you're not adding value, go remove yourself and find a place that you can. And I feel like that's a really good way to look at what we're talking about too, right? There are so many opportunities to get involved. There really are. Small towns, that's what we run on, right? Is volunteerism and people everybody doing their part, right?
And it's true. We always use this. The statistic is based on some census numbers that North Dakota needs almost 9,000 volunteers to get involved in some kind of active, like your board member, maybe it's a church council or running for an office. That's like 9,000 positions. So you think about that. Whenever we do a training, I always ask, how many of you serve on one board or two or three? And the hands stay up. It's typically people never serve on one board or one volunteer opportunity because the need is so great. And I think we have a lot of talent and interest. You don't have to have a PhD to serve on a church council. No. You don't have to have extensive knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order. Those things come, and I think it's important to learn and be engaged and understand how meetings work. But that's a give and take. And I think boards and communities need to be better at, building people up, set people up to succeed. I think it's really shameful when people are asked to serve on a board and they have no idea what the expectation is, right. What's the term limit. People want to be part of a winning team. And when you ask people to serve on a particular board or run for an office, it's important that they know what they're getting into.
Right.
And I see that as a huge shortcoming just because we're trying to fill spots that are open.
I think for all of the folks that will listen to this that are involved in these either nonprofit boards or committee boards or just groups, right? That is something, what you just said is so important. People, there's nothing worse than being asked to do something when you're not really sure what the goalposts are. Like, what does this mean? And how much time is expected of me? What are you really looking for? What do you really need? Because it actually feels like for me, I'm one of those, I'm a volunteer, right? I do these things. I get involved and I get on boards. I like that. But I don't like being asked when I get the perception that they just need somebody and they know I say yes to things. So they're asking me.
Right.
I don't. And that's, so it's like, I think it's kind of insulting, even if you're a normal volunteering kind of person. It's just like, come on, what are you asking me for? What do you see in me that I can do for you too? Right. So there's a lot of education that I think comes into this. And I think your lead local program could really help with it. So it excites me that you guys do that.
Well, and we talk about it a lot in many of the things that we do, even just having a conversation in the communities and thinking about, you really think about the population of a community and then look at the people who serve. It is a small fraction of a community's population. When to think about why is that? I had someone approach me this a few months ago, just sharing their frustration about they're on the nominating committee for their church. And out of like 10 calls they made, not one person agreed to serve on church council, and just with a great deal of frustration. And so, of course, I start asking questions. What are you hearing? Either hearing, I'm not qualified, I don't have the time, I'm not really sure what to do. It's all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So, we even talk about having like board member position descriptions, just like you would a job.
Absolutely.
And
yep.
I just think people's time is valuable, and people are stretched thin and moving in a lot of different directions, and people are busy and they really want to know what they're signing up for. I don't think people are unwilling. I just think sometimes they're very unsure of their own capability and what's expected.
Yeah, I think that is going to be like one of those big takeaways. Like, that people are not unwilling; they're just unsure, and that's so important to remember. Because and here's the best thing. So, like, this is such a common gripe. I'll call it a gripe for anybody that, like, if you're one of those people doing the calling, it is so frustrating, right? You just feel like nobody cares anymore. Our town's going to go down in the dumps because community pride is gone, and nobody cares, and nobody wants to get involved. So you can either do that, or you can take the approach that sounds a little bit more like where you were going, like, okay, well, what could we do to make it easier to say yes? And it's structure, it's communication, it's structure, it's clear expectations. And then it's actually giving people the room to serve with their gifts. Gift stewardship is like a big thing. It's like a bandwagon, like a drum that I beat for me, because I just think there's beautiful, varied talents and skills in our community. I know there are. But if we don't give people an opportunity to show up and to serve with those gifts, then you end up feeling like you're not adding the value you want, and you move on, maybe after one term, and you don't feel like you made any impact. And that doesn't feel good to somebody that really wants to make an impact. So
it's so true. And, I think about like our board best practices. I'll go back to that document too, thinking about, engaging people, getting the right people in the right seat on the right bus. And that's all over with communities or any organization, just thinking about matching the people with the right position. When I think about, I equate successful communities to successful committees. There's so many similarities. And I also think people want to be part of a winning team. If people are hearing that particular organization or community, there's a lot of backbiting and they don't get along, they don't respect opinions, who wants to be part of that? I don't.
Right.
I have enough going on in my life. I don't need to be part of that in a volunteer position or opportunity. What are you conveying to others? What are people saying about your community or your organization? Are they being respectful? Do they respect each other's opinions? And again, we talked about this. You don't have to necessarily get along or hang out in your spare time with the people you serve with. But, for the sake of the organization and the community, respect other opinions and agree to disagree if that's so be.
Right. You just said something that I have thought about a lot. I came from an organizational development background. So it was mostly working with companies, internally with companies. Well, all of the things that makes a strong workplace culture, it's the same things that need to take place in community. It's just, it can feel harder to get your arms around it because no one's in charge, to lead those things. But grassroots movements can happen. They do happen. They happen all the time. And I think that's what I hope growing small towns can be, is to plant some seeds for all the things that we're talking about. How do we get more people involved? How do we listen better? How do we open our own minds better? How do we adopt more of that growth mindset about stuff that we can change and we can improve and we can get better? And also to have a place where we lead with positivity instead of constantly pointing out what's wrong. Like, you can't solve problems without identifying the problem. So I understand that there's some of that has to take place, but just not like perseverating or spinning on the problem, instead saying, okay, we've identified this as a challenge for us. What are we going to do about it? Right? It kind of move into that next phase.
Oftentimes when people come to me like a problem in a community or, maybe even just a complaint, quite honestly, my response will always be, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Right. And you can complain forever, but then what are you going to do about it? Right. Like you said, being negative, we all know, is so much easier than finding a solution to to a problem. It's just so much easier to be negative.
I've actually said, like, it doesn't take any talent to point out what's wrong. Like the real hard work comes in when you say, okay, like we've identified this thing. Now what should we try? And I'm hoping, again, I'm hoping that we can also take less of a catastrophic approach and just say, what would be something small and simple we could start with? Like it's a huge problem. Sometimes the problems can feel completely overwhelming, but you could maybe think of one small thing you could try. And the cool thing is when you keep the little small bets, when you keep them small, people can easily pop in and pop out of those things too, right? It doesn't become like you have to manage this thing for 3 years and that's what we're asking you to do. And people go, whoa, I've got a life, I've got a family. Yeah, no thanks, not me. So I think it speaks to also just maybe letting go of exactly how everything's been approached in the past and how do we break it into smaller chunks and smaller trials or tests or pilots, that I think is an important part of this discussion too. Like you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So the big challenges, they don't get solved in one fell swoop.
Well, and people need to see that they're accomplishing something too. I mean, we talk a lot about promoting the small wins, even if you can, celebrate those small wins, no matter what it might be. Maybe you wrote a $500 community foundation grant. Well, $500 is not going to transform your community organization, but it's a start. And you have to promote those small wins. And I think some of the effort with growing small towns is important that people start talking about that. No successful community or organization happens just because. Yeah. It never does. You need people that are committed and that care deeply about whatever the effort might be. And, people get uncomfortable with having that conversation about the future of their organization or community. But I think what you're trying to do is commendable in that, just pushing the envelope and getting people talking about what do they want their community to look like in 5 or 10 years.
Right. And what do you want your role to be in that? Like, because I think life, my friends, Brody and Carly, they, on their Rural Revolution podcast, they made the comment, like, life is too short to not love where you live.
Love that.
I do too. I was like, yep, isn't that the truth? And I think it's way too easy to stay stuck on the things that your community doesn't have or doesn't do for you. So I think what you guys talk about a lot at Extension that I think is so important is, how do we speak about our own community? Do we talk about it like it's got possibility and that there's good things going on? Or do we only talk about what we don't have? Like, there's nothing I hate more than people say, well, they're never going to want to move here. And I look at them and I'm like, well, you live here and I live here. Do you not like living here? I mean, like, what does that even mean? And I think we're just sometimes too flippant about how important those words are because it tells a story, right?
Well, it's important. Mindset is awfully important. And I have this story that I often share when I work with communities. It's called, What's It Like in Your Town? I just read it again the other day. I could almost recite it verbatim, but I think it talks about a gentleman who's sitting outside a gas station and some people pull in from out of town and say, hey, we're thinking about moving here. What's it like in your town? And he said, well, what's it like in your town? And they say, well, it's fabulous that people care about each other and they get involved and there's a great deal of community pride. And he said, that's exactly what my town is like. And then another car pulls up and the same conversation takes place. And they say, we're thinking about moving to your community. What's it like here in your town? And he said, well, let me ask you, what's it like where you came from? And they said, oh, it's terrible. People don't get along and we don't like each other and we don't work well together. And it's just not a very good place to be. And he goes, yep, that's pretty much what my town is like too. And so I think I'm
that's
simplifying
funny.
the story, but I think it's an important narrative for us to have. I mean, for you to ask, well, why wouldn't you live here? I think if this pandemic has taught any of us here who live in a rural area how important space is.
Oh, right.
And we have talked several times, we couldn't even imagine living in a small apartment in New York City for 3 months, being quarantined.
Yeah.
And so we have an amazing story to tell, but we're not very good at telling it because being defeatist is much easier than being celebratory, unfortunately.
It's a major, like, it's a bee in my bonnet, if there ever was one. Like, I think about I hope that our actual physical space here in Oaks can be a place where we openly celebrate and we're not even apologetic about it. Like, we're not going to be sorry that we're celebrating, because the little wins, they get overlooked. And then it can be easy to forget that there's positive momentum, that there's positive things happening. We just don't share the good things enough. We truly don't. And then it becomes a narrative that like nothing cool ever happens around here. And that's just patently false. And I think it is probably for every small community.
And there's an actual process called Appreciative Inquiry that a colleague of mine, Marie Bidston, really asks us to use oftentimes when we do strategic planning with organizations. We always start with a positive. And I don't mean to necessarily always take a Pollyanna approach to things. I mean, I know what the numbers say. I understand that. But I also think when we start to think about, I always start strategic planning sessions with, tell me about your wins. What's happening? What have you done well? What is this organization good at? First of all, there's always this silence. Like, I wasn't expecting to talk about that. We're here to do problem solving.
Right.
And then it really sets the stage for, okay, I guess we are doing good things and we are making a difference. And it just changes the narrative of how people look at their planning for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. Well, the truth is, if you can't identify anything that you're doing well, what is the likelihood that you're going to feel equipped or capable of solving the problems that you see? You know, like, it actually does just build on this sense of, it changes the sense of ownership over problems too, I think. Like, okay, you know, if you can say we've accomplished these things, this is what we do really well, then challenges and problems don't seem so overwhelming. So exactly. I think that's really important. Okay, let's pivot into, because you just brought up this challenging time that we've been living in. And this was a bet that I made. I made it about a year ago. Like, it was a bet for small towns, thinking like, I think there's a real trend happening. I mean, obviously, like, we're opening a co-working space. That's not something that people get really super easily. But now not post COVID, I get we're still in it, but post being thrust into remote working for like everybody, people get it now, right? So I've always felt that there was this opportunity hanging out there for rural communities to attract remote employment, like, and to get companies to realize that you don't just have to target the talent right in the Fargo, Moorhead metro area or right in the Bismarck area. These are the biggest cities in our state, right? That there are wildly talented people living in every pocket of North Dakota. And there's various reasons what brought them to that space. So then we get to live here and we get to have all the space you referred to that we can enjoy. You know, we can breathe, we can be outside, we can have space, we can have freedom, and you can still have work and a career fulfillment that feels meaningful, right? And so through this NDSU Extension, you've got a remote worker initiative. And I know we haven't completely, I'm saying we now because I'm behind this in every sense of the word. We haven't really gotten the traction that we're hoping for yet in North Dakota, but I think if we keep talking about it, we're going to start to get there. So can you share a bit about how this came about, you know, and what we need to do? Because everybody listening to this, if they live in North Dakota, we're in this together. So can you share a bit about it?
Sure. So as you said, obviously about mid-March, millions of Americans, including myself, found ourselves all of a sudden working from home or working remotely. And it was a scary time. And we were wondering about the security of our employment and what was going to happen. And I know for many Americans who work in service industries and certainly in healthcare, this isn't an option.
Right.
But for many, it is. And wondering, how do we do it? What kind of equipment do we need? How do we do it to the best of our ability? How do we, continue to work? I mean, it was a scary time. And a colleague of ours, Lynette Flage, who is our associate extension director, had said, hey, I heard about this program that Utah State University Extension is offering, a remote work certification program. Maybe that's something that we could do. And so 4 of us from Extension actually took the course as students in March or April. We went through it in April. And we really felt like this was very timely. It was just like I tell you, all the stars aligned. We went through the course and just felt like we need to do this. We need to bring this to North Dakota.
Can you share just a touch about what you learned? Because I'm going to tell you this, as an over decade-long veteran of working at home, I know how to do this. And there's still things I can learn. Always. There's always
Sure.
things to learn. It has been truly interesting to watch for me the gap that does exist. Like I was kind of unaware of it because I've just been doing it, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I've gotten on calls and like Zoom has a whole thing where so many people had to quick figure out how to use it. And here I had been using it for a really long time. And so I think it'd be helpful for people to know kind of some of the things that you learned in that process, because there's definitely a gap.
Wow. Yeah, for sure. There is a gap. And that's funny you bring that up, because I remember when we held the first virtual town hall meeting, you were guiding me on Zoom on needing to be in presenter view. When we did those, we just said, we're just going to do it. We don't know how to use Zoom, but we're just going to do it because people need to hear from others, find out what's going on in communities. And I tell you what, the learning, yes, there's basic concepts about, so there's 9 modules in the remote work course, and we can talk about that a little bit, but really thinking about the technology, learning how to use Zoom. And I know there's other platforms out there, but thinking about, let's just say, a virtual platform, using appropriate technology and the finer points of that. So we talked about that. And then thinking about your workspace. And I know some of this seems so elementary, but I tell you what, when in the middle of March, when I basically moved my office home, I dumped everything on my dining room table. And then my college sophomore son also came home in March, and he is trying to work at the dining room table. And we have 4 monitors and 2 computers and lights and paper. It was ridiculous. And so one of the first assignments in the remote work initiative is to take a picture of your workspace and of your background and submit that. I was mortified. I thought, I certainly do not want anyone else to see where I am working and what this workspace looks like. So that was a good kick in the pants for me to think about getting organized and creating an efficient workspace.
Yep.
And I know that seems like, well, of course that's what you need, but really when you're faced with that and you think about, I've certainly seen some interesting things on Zoom as far as people's background and what is happening in their workspace. So, I mean, it's just really kind of an awareness thing to think about what you're presenting to the world. Just because you can wear sweatpants doesn't mean, a t-shirt is appropriate for a professional meeting.
Right.
We just can't throw that out the window.
Yep.
So we learned a little bit about, your workspace and the appropriate equipment necessary to work remotely. Thinking about communication. And if you're working alone, that's probably not the biggest issue. But when you're working with a team and you continue to work with a team remotely, this is huge. And they always talk in remote work. Over communication is just communication.
Yeah.
You just can't communicate enough. And so we covered a number of platforms like Trello or Asana, some of those online communication networks and calendars and workflow opportunities that I had not even heard of. I'd heard of Slack, but not used it. And so that is one way that we continue to communicate with the people who've gone through the course. If you haven't used it, it's been kind of a lifeline for us.
Yeah.
And then one of the modules is thinking about productivity and time management. I found myself in front of a computer for many hours and never getting up.
Right.
And physically, obviously that's awful.
Well, they say that sitting is the new smoking, Jodi.
Right.
I mean, it's a real thing. And
it is a thing.
And what I think is so amazing is, again, like to me, I've been living this way. I've been working and living this way for years. And I didn't realize I couldn't have possibly known what a shock it was going to be to people, just because I had been doing it. But I really can only imagine what that felt like. Like if you're used to having coworkers, the incredible shift in that, losing that camaraderie, and how do you maintain even a sense of that? Because it's still not the same. You and I have agreed. We agree on this, that the virtual thing, it's beautiful that we have the opportunity. It's not right. It's not the same. So.
It is not the same, but we've adjusted. I mean, we have to. We just don't have the luxury of just putting life on hold for a year or whatever madness is going to be.
Right.
And then, really thinking about, working as a team. I work with a lot of people, and we just had to figure it out. And there are so many opportunities and resources available to do that. And so we did think about taking breaks every half hour or so just to stretch and maybe even step outside and get some fresh air and revitalize, get the blood moving, and come back and continue to work. One thing we see with remote workers is remote workers work way more and are doing much more than when people report to an office.
Yep.
And part of that is because of the sense of responsibility, needing to feel like you're really being productive, and the just simply work is always present. At any time of the day, I can just go over to my computer at my dining room table and check my email.
Yep.
Or work on a report or whatever that might be. It's always there.
The sense of boundaries is completely lost unless you define them, which I'm sure is something that you talked a lot about in that program.
It is covered. It's a specific module in the course thinking about setting up those boundaries because it's so important.
Yeah.
Especially when, for many people who are also acting like an educator at home to their children and trying to create those boundaries. That's a real challenge.
It is. Okay, so the course is a piece of it. When you look at the big picture of the shift that we know, and everybody now knows, that remote employment is going to continue to be a thing. There are going to be some companies that never choose to bring everybody back to the office. I actually believe that. I mean, I believe that. That's obviously just conjecture on my part, but there's a lot of things that's going to be very interesting, don't you think, to watch the next couple of years. And if they can successfully still hit the targets that they have for their organization from home, and then they reduce all that overhead, I just feel like that's a thing. So learning how to do it is the start. What else are you hoping can become a part of this initiative overall for the state of North Dakota?
Right. So ideally, we would model what's happened in Utah. And I don't know, that's again, perfect storm of what happened there. So I'll try to make this as simple as possible. But a county commissioner in Utah was trying to find ways to maintain population in rural communities. I mean, just like what's happening here in North Dakota.
Right.
And thinking about, a brain gain instead of that brain gain idea. And thinking about creating or continuing to employ professionals in rural communities at a professional wage.
Yep.
And not having to live in, Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And so they started to support this particular program through Utah State University Extension and employing professionals in rural communities. And I think in North Dakota, ideally, that's what we would do. And, maybe it's working in people's homes or in a co-working space like you're working to create. Mm-hmm. People still want to work with others in many cases.
They do.
They want to bounce ideas off of each other and brainstorm and work together and just see other people. But if you don't have to commute a half hour, think about that. People have said that too, just the well-being of being able to be home more, spend more time with my family, but also think about the tax base. If professionals are able to be employed at their level of education and skill set and are making more money, think about the return to the local economy that will have.
And it's new money.
Exactly. It's new money.
It's new. It's outside money. Like the salary is being paid by an outside company. So it just adds to the local, it's different. And obviously we want our local businesses to pay good wages. I mean, but that's still coming from the same pot of money. It's generated there and then paid out to salaries. Where this remote employment, it's a completely new injection of cash into your community. And of course that some of that gets spent locally because people do, even though that's shop local is always going to be a drum that we beat as well, right? Some of that's spent locally. And then kids in your school system, if they've got a family, then their kids become a part of your school census and all of that matters. And it's funded from an external source.
Exactly. And ideally, that's what would happen here in North Dakota is through our work with this, I have been so surprised at the job opportunities available to people remotely and not necessarily like an 8-to-5 job. One of the program coordinators from Utah he physically lived in Utah, but worked for a Chinese company,
sure,
a technology company for 12 years. And I've just been so aware now of the opportunities, even for people thinking about, we call it, freelance or gig work. Maybe they want to edit a book or edit a document, or, it's piecework. And a woman who went through the course last month with us and involved in an active farming operation with her husband, and they're equal partners, but she wants to do something to supplement her income and just really kind of feed her, I guess, her need to stay connected with her educational background and professional. Sure. She doesn't want to lose touch of that. And so I connected her with some of the resources to do some editing. And she's got a keen eye and very skilled at that work. And for her own well-being, it's just something she wants to pursue. So the opportunities really are amazing for people working in remote areas. And North Dakota really is positioned in an interesting advantage because of our rural telephone cooperatives who have this amazingly fast internet service that so many states do not have.
I know.
I'm shocked.
I know it is shocking. And so what's also shocking to me, and I just keep thinking the more that we talk about this and the more that we say, so what I want to see happen with this, Jodi, is I do want to see that model that Utah is using. I want to see that adopted here. And if we need to do it on a small scale, then let's start with our co-working space. Let's start with our region and then pay attention to it. Look at the metrics, create the baselines, figure out what's actually happening, figure out if it's actually working, tweak it if it's not. And then why couldn't it be replicated? I just think I've said it before. There's never been a better time to live and still have the kind of work that, and again, we need all different levels of employment. We need all different types of jobs across industries. This is not in any way a disparaging comment to other kinds of work. 8 to 5 jobs, do you have to be on site? We need those people too. But sometimes, and often I think I see this a lot with the trailing spouse, whoever, especially if you're a couple, right? And one person gets a job that brings them to our community. It's very specific. And then there's the trailer going, well, what about me? And now I just think there's never been a cooler time to figure out a way to maybe create a side gig or monetize, either a hobby or a passion or your education. And then again, this remote employment opportunity. And it's partly, don't you feel like part of it is getting our large employers in North Dakota that are based in these bigger cities to open their eyes up to these opportunities and possibilities?
I think that's really key. I mean, as we have researched this and the workforce, thinking about all of the professionals in our rural communities who are underemployed.
Do you have a statistic on that?
I don't have a statistic on that.
Okay. I'd be so curious.
Yes, I know it. And that's really based on just hearing people's stories when we go through this course, because we really get to know these people, where they're working and who they're working for. But I just think it's an untapped market of skill set for organizations in our state that really are only focusing on a workforce in our metro areas. And it's an untapped market. And
what's sad about that is that they're really then fighting every other employer in the community for that same pool of talent. I get it. There's a lot more people there, but you're not if you open up rural positions, I would guarantee that the quality of your applicants isn't going to go down. They're not also matching you against 5 other opportunities because it doesn't exist. So to me, the first to market with this has a really great opportunity. So all of you, employers or people that work for big companies, seriously, think about this. Think about this because it's a huge opportunity for them.
I think it is an opportunity. And I know that we have been thrown into this situation, whether we wanted to or not initially, but I think it's changed the mindset of reporting to a workspace and being there for an X amount of time.
Right.
And research has shown that people have been accountable for 9 months. People are doing more than what's ever been expected. And North Dakota is known for its work ethic. Absolutely. And people going above and beyond. And so, our hope certainly is that, our evaluations have been very positive from this course. People feel empowered. We have seen people who have never used Zoom to, professionals like yourself who are just trying to, create a new network of people. Mm-hmm. And that's what people will see. Typically, the cohort is between 50 and 60 people. When we went through it, there were 200.
Wow.
All of a sudden people found these are folks from all over the country, all over the United States who have, there's airline workers who have now been laid off of their jobs.
Sure.
It covers the gamut. People who don't know how to change their name in their Zoom box to, the other end of the spectrum. And so I appreciate that networking opportunity and learning from others and hearing other people's stories and, what they're going through.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that I have never felt more hopeful for the future of North Dakota, for one. I just, like you said, that we do not talk about fiber internet enough. We just don't. It should be on a billboard. Man, you should be able to see it from the sky. So when you're flying over our state and not thinking to stop here, you could tap into the benefit. But it's such a big deal because I talk to people from all over the country, and my internet I very rarely have a problem. Truly. And a lot of the people I talk to, because they're in rural communities, a lot of the people that I bring onto the show, they're in small towns. A lot of times their internet gets wonky and we do edit, we edit it out. It's all fine, but it's just something that I don't think we celebrate and leverage as much as we need to.
We totally take it for granted. And I was in Pennsylvania early part of the year prior to the pandemic and working with a group there from Penn State. And they just talked about, Pennsylvania, for heaven's sakes. I think they must have way better opportunities than we have in North Dakota, right? Isn't that our mindset here? And just really saying that there is barely dial-up internet in many, many communities in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania. And so there's no doubt that we in North Dakota are positioned to really embrace this remote work opportunity.
Yeah. Well, so with that, by the way, for our listeners, everything that you and I talk about, any links that, we've talked. So are you able to share your board best practices?
Yes.
A link to that? Okay. Because we referenced that a few times, but also all the information regarding this remote employment certification, that process, because do you want to share anything about kind of what that looks like right now? How do people, we'll put the information there so they can check it out.
Sure.
But what are you hoping people will do with that info?
Right. So I'll just back up a minute and we'll include the link, but you can go on the NDSU Extension website and find how to register for the remote work course. It's a 1-month course. We actually meet over Zoom with all participants every Thursday. So we either meet at 2 p.m. in the afternoon or at 7 p.m. in the evening.
Okay.
So people can join, which, multiple times, but otherwise the course is self-directed. There's modules. The platform is called Canvas, where the modules for learning are at. It's self-directed, as I said. The course costs $249, but we still have some scholarships that we have offered North Dakotans for $199. So it's a bargain at $50 to take this course right now.
Right. What a generous thing for you all to do.
And we feel like if enough people hear about it and go through the course and feel it's of value, like anything, word of mouth and testimonials are the greatest promoter there is. So we feel that people have, we've seen multiple people from the same organization take the course. So we know that people are talking about this and the value that it has.
That's awesome. Okay. So that's what the individuals need to do. What if there are employers listening to this? What do we want them to do, Jodi?
One, I think really, I have a statistic here that 82% of corporate leaders said that they plan to allow remote work. They will plan to allow this once the pandemic is over. And I think that's really important that this is here to stay. Right. Workers have proven that they can be efficient and productive, not in an office setting. And granted, this is not everyone's cut out for this kind of work, but for many, it's good for the bottom line, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so if you have remote work and you're looking for people who are skilled and now have gone through a certification course, get in touch with myself. They can email me or give me a call and I can share that information with you. You have all of that, but we can just start a conversation. And if we can be the conduit between getting people employed and filling the workforce, I think that's ideal.
Right. And then they can call me and they can come and work here. You could actually have virtual teaming happening, right? Like it's just an exciting frontier. I will say this, like I think like you just said, with 82% of leaders saying that they're going to continue to allow for remote employment, that is the part of the idea of the new normal that I'm perfectly willing to embrace. We say that a lot, and I try not to ever say it because I'm like, nothing about this can be normal. But the work, this way of working, it can be, and I think maybe it should be, in the sense that it's moving us in a progressive direction that makes sense for all parties, right? It's not just like you said, we needed to be able to prove that we weren't going to lose effectiveness, or that our performance metrics wouldn't be adversely affected by letting people work from home. That was a gamble nobody would have taken. Nobody would have just said like, hey, everybody go work from home. We're going to try it out. Nobody would have done that. So the pandemic, as hard as it's been, it pushed us into places that we would have never just voluntarily walked into. So I think we have to see that as a positive.
I think there's been so many unintended consequences from this. We can dwell all day. I mean, there's been some awful things that have come from this for sure, but we've also learned about working differently and being flexible and looking at more opportunities. And we just need to be open to those.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately it comes down in some ways to survival. Like businesses have had to really, really adapt and pivot quickly. They've had to get really creative and innovative with how to do things differently, and especially amidst restrictions if they're a physical business. And then every other business that's had the opportunity to bring people remote, we did it. And that is something to celebrate. And I think there's a spirit of people in North Dakota that we also, as much as we don't talk about fiber internet enough, we also don't talk about the spirit of who we are as people enough. These are converging trends. And there's something that we gotta jump on board with. So I'm so grateful to you and all your team at Extension right here in my county. I'm thankful to know you. I'm thankful to partner with you. And I can't wait to see what we create together in 2021 and beyond.
It's exciting, and it's exciting to work with people who are excited about their communities and the opportunities for rural communities. I just think it's endless.
I agree. Thanks so much for coming, Jodi. And I hope we'll have you back on again soon.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Isn't it amazing listening to somebody who works in so many small towns that we're all a lot of times facing very similar challenges? It's just so interesting. Jodi is a wonderful resource. I feel so lucky to be right in her backyard. Like I had said at the beginning of this episode, you want to be sure you listen to Jodi's Fast 5. She offers 5 quick tips to increase civic engagement in your community. You can get that by heading out to growing.smalltowns.org/fast5, enter your email address, and we will send you the recording. In the meantime, until we talk again, keep on doing what you can do in your community to help grow your small town. We'll see you soon.